There is a being in Middle-earth on whom the One Ring does not work. Not a being who resisted it. Not a being who fought its pull through centuries of discipline and grief. A being who picked it up, turned it over in his fingers, and handed it back. Because the ring's entire mechanism, the reaching into desire, the extension of Sauron's will, the promise of power, and the slow corruption that follows, found nothing to grip. Not resistance. Absence. The ring looked for something in Tom Bombadil that simply was not there for it to use. This is not speculation. This is in the book. Chapter 7 of the Fellowship of the Ring. Frodo puts on the ring and vanishes. Bombadil calls his name without searching for him. Then Bombadil puts the ring on his own finger, and nothing happens. He does not vanish. The ring that makes the world's greatest bearers invisible, that reaches into their souls and amplifies their worst desires, sits on his finger like a cheap trinket from a market stall and does nothing at all. What does that mean? Who is this being? And here is the question this whole video orbits. If Tom Bombadil had the power to make Sauron's greatest weapon irrelevant, was his refusal to intervene in the War of the Ring a choice of wisdom, or was it something far older and stranger than wisdom, a will so rooted in its own nature that the fate of kingdoms simply did not reach him? This is not fan fiction. This is not speculation pulled from enthusiasm and wishful thinking. This is what the text actually says when you follow it all the way down, and once you follow it all the way down, you cannot look at Middle-earth the same way again. Let's start with what actually happened. Frodo and his companions arrive at Bombadil's house in the Old Forest after a genuinely terrifying encounter with a willow tree that tried to drown them. They are given food and rest and warmth, and then their host asks to see the ring. Not demands, asks, and Frodo hands it over. Bombadil holds it up, looks through it like a spyglass, and for a moment it seems to vanish. But it has not gone anywhere. Bombadil sets it down on the table and it reappears. Then he puts it on. Pay attention here, because most people who have read this scene think of it as comedy. A jolly batty old man playing games with a magic ring, not taking it seriously, not understanding what he is holding. That reading is wrong. It misses what Tolkien is showing you. The ring disappears on every other wearer. It makes Frodo invisible. It made Bilbo invisible for 60 years. It pulled Gollum into the shadow and kept him there for 500 years. It made the Nazgul what they are. 9 human kings who put on lesser rings and were pulled by degrees into a half-life of servitude to Sauron's will. Tom Bombadil puts the ring on and remains entirely, cheerfully visible. He smiles and hands it back. The ring does not work. And this is not a glitch. This is what the ring is. Sauron's will, extended outward through the world. It functions because Sauron's will can reach into every bearer who exists within the cosmological framework he and the other Ainur inhabit, which is all of Arda, all of Middle-earth, every being who was made by Ilúvatar, or shaped by the Ainur, or born into the drama of the Third Age. The ring reaches for them and finds them, because they are made of the same stuff as the story it belongs to. And then there is Tom Bombadil, who is not made of that stuff at all. When Frodo puts the ring on in Bombadil's house and vanishes, Bombadil speaks his name and finds him anyway. Think about what that means. The ring's invisibility works by pulling the wearer partially into the shadow world, Sauron's domain. It makes you invisible to the waking world because you are no longer fully in it. That is why the Nazgul can still sense ring-bearers. The shadow world is their home now, and when you put on the ring, you step into their territory. But when Frodo vanishes in Bombadil's house, Bombadil does not need the shadow world's sight lines to find him. He simply speaks. He knows where Frodo is, through some faculty that the ring's mechanism does not interfere with. The ring cannot hide you from Tom Bombadil, and the ring cannot touch Tom Bombadil. These two facts, taken together, say something extraordinary. The ring's power derives from Sauron's will, and Sauron's will operates through Arda's cosmological framework. Bombadil exists outside that framework. He is not simply resistant to the ring's influence in the way Galadriel is resistant. Through will and long self-examination and the sustained refusal of temptation, he is outside the system the ring operates in. The ring cannot reach him because the ring does not know, in whatever sense an object of power can know, that he is there. Now think about what that actually means. Now here is what nobody asks about the Council of Elrond. The Council of Elrond is the meeting of the wise at Rivendell, in the Fellowship of the Ring, Chapter 2 of Book 2. Elrond presides. Gandalf reveals the history of the ring. Boromir makes his case for Gondor. Frodo volunteers. All of this is famous. The scene is beloved, both in the book and in the film, and Peter Jackson's adaptation of it is rightly celebrated as one of the great sequences in cinema. But there is a section of that council that the film skips entirely, a section that is short, almost casual, and contains one of the most quietly devastating admissions in the entire book. Gandalf raises the question of whether they should send the ring to Tom Bombadil for safekeeping. This is not a joke. Gandalf raises it as a genuine option to be seriously considered. Glorfindel, an elf who fought in the First Age and was so powerful he returned from death to serve in the Third, considers it, and then says this, that in the end, if all others are overcome, Bombadil would fall too. Not because the ring would corrupt him, not because Sauron would destroy him, but because if Sauron remade the world, Bombadil would retire to the west and forget it, as he always has before. As he always has before. The Council of Elrond, the gathering of the wisest and most experienced beings in the Third Age, says this about Tom Bombadil as though it is a known fact, a biographical detail. Something that has already happened. At some earlier point in the history of Middle-earth, the world changed in ways that did not concern him, and he withdrew. Then the world changed back, or enough of it did, and he returned, or the world returned to him, or both. This is not the description of a hermit who prefers the woods to the city. This is the description of something that exists on a different timescale from history itself, something that has already outlasted entire ages, and will go on outlasting them, retreating when the world it belongs to is temporarily replaced, and returning when something worth returning to is there again. And then Gandalf says something even more important. He says that Bombadil's power would be too small to cope if all others were overcome. But pay attention to what Gandalf does not say. He does not say Bombadil is weaker than Sauron. He does not say the ring would corrupt him. He says the ring has no power over Bombadil, directly and plainly. He says that within his own domain, Bombadil is his own master, and that is the phrase that matters, his own master. The ring works by mastering its bearer, by reaching into the bearer's deepest desires and slowly, patiently reorienting them toward servitude to Sauron. It is a masterpiece of slow corruption. Frodo, who bears it for less than a year, is nearly destroyed by it. Gollum, who bore it for 5 centuries, has been remade by it into something barely recognizable as the hobbit he started out as. The Nazgul, who wore lesser rings, are now shadows without will or memory or selfhood, existing only as extensions of Sauron's purpose. Tom Bombadil is his own master. The ring cannot master him because he cannot be mastered. Not as a matter of resisting the ring's pull, which would require there to be a pull to resist. The ring finds him and discovers he is entirely his own thing, prior to any system of mastery. That is not a small power. That is a completely different category of being. Picture this: the forges of Orodruin in the Second Age, Sauron at the height of his craft. Centuries of accumulated knowledge poured into this one act of creation. He has learned the lore of ring-making from the elves of Eregion, the ancient secrets of how to encode will into metal, how to make an object carry intention outward into the world. He is himself a Maya, a craftsman of terrible genius, and he is doing what no one has ever done. He is pouring himself into this ring, his intelligence, his will, his ability to perceive and reach across distances, all of it encoded into a band of gold small enough to fit on a mortal finger. The fires are around him, the mountain shakes. He speaks the words of binding, and somewhere far to the north, in a small valley by a small river, Before any of this is finished or known or a problem, Tom Bombadil sings. The trees listen. The river runs. He is walking through his forest on some errand of morning, noticing the light on the leaves, perhaps catching a fish or calling to Goldberry. And the forging of the most terrible weapon in the history of the Third Age is as relevant to him as weather in a country he has never visited. Because Sauron's weapon can only reach what Sauron's power can reach. And Sauron's power reaches everything in Arda, except the one thing that predates the framework from which Sauron draws it. The Dark Lord forged a weapon to dominate every mind in the world, and the oldest of all things in Middle-earth would never know it was pointed at him. Now we need to talk about the names, because the names matter more than anything else in establishing what Tom Bombadil actually is. In the Council of Elrond, when Gandalf mentions Bombadil, the elves from Lothlorien know who he means immediately. They call him Iarwain Ben-Adar. This is Sindarin. Iarwain means old young, or oldest, a compound that carries the specific meaning of the superlative, not older than most things, not ancient by the standards of elves, but oldest, the oldest. And Ben-Adar, without father, fatherless, without an origin in another being, without a source that made him what he is. The dwarves know him as Forn, simply ancient in the dwarvish sense, something so old that ancient is the only word available, and it still falls short. The men of Rohan, whose language Tolkien rendered in Old English in the appendices, know him as Orald. Same meaning, the same orientation across every people who have a name for him. He is not merely very old. He is old in a way that pre-exists the category of old. He exists before there was a before to measure against. Now lay that against Tolkien's cosmology as established in the Silmarillion, in the first chapter, the Ainulindal. The Ainur, the great spiritual powers including the Valar and Maiar, existed before Arda. They were created by Ilúvatar, sang the music of the Ainur that would become the blueprint of the world, and then the most powerful among them entered Arda to give it shape. Sauron is a Maya. He entered Arda at its making. He has existed since the First Age, since before the elves woke, since before men came east. His power is immense, his age is staggering, and even he is dwarfed by the Valar, who preceded him in the order of power. And yet across every people who have a name for Tom Bombadil, across elves and dwarves and men, the word used for him is oldest. Not older than Sauron, not older than the elves, oldest. In a mythology where the Ainur themselves predate the creation of the world, naming something else, oldest and fatherless, is not vague poetry. It is a specific claim. This being exists outside the chain of creation entirely. He was not made by Ilúvatar. He was not shaped by the Ainur. He belongs to the material earth itself, as something prior to all the wills that have claimed it. In letter 144, Tolkien wrote about Bombadil with a kind of careful uncertainty that is unusual from an author so meticulous about his world. He described Bombadil as a spirit of earth, and then immediately specified what he meant by that. Not a Maya, not a Vala, not a nature spirit in the standard sense of any of those things, but something that belongs to the material world itself, as its own kind of presence, prior to the theological drama of elves and men, and the war between Eru's light and Morgoth's corruption. Tom Bombadil is not a character in that drama. He predates the drama. And here is what that means for the ring's power over him. The ring works by extending Sauron's will into the desires of its bearer. But Sauron's will is a Maya power. It is rooted in the Ainulindal, in the framework of spiritual beings who entered Arda at its making and have been part of its story ever since. The ring can reach every being who exists within that story, and Bombadil exists outside it, not above it, not below it, orthogonal to it. The ring reaches for him and finds that he is written in a different language, one the ring was never designed to read. This is the point, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But Tolkien's letters give us something even more interesting than the cosmological argument. They give us the author himself admitting he did not fully know what Bombadil was. And Tolkien knew everything about Middle-earth. He wrote appendices on appendices. He worked out the year-by-year history of the Third Age. He calculated the phases of the moon during the War of the Ring to make sure Frodo and Sam's journey was accurate. He was the most meticulous world builder who ever lived. And yet in letter 144 he wrote, "I do not think Tom needs philosophizing about, and is not improved by it, but in a story which is built in such a way that he can only occur by being an anomaly, one must be satisfied with him as he is. He can only occur by being an anomaly. This is remarkable." Tolkien is not saying Bombadil is unexplained because explaining him would take too long. He is saying the story's own internal logic cannot contain him without acknowledging that he is structurally outside it. He is an anomaly in the most precise sense, a data point that does not fit the model, that the model was not built to account for. The story of Arda has a structure, a beginning, a cosmological framework, a history with a shape. And Tom Bombadil sits inside that history while being prior to it, like a rock that was there before the river formed, and will be there after the river dries up. In letter 153, Tolkien went further. He described Bombadil as representing a natural and unhistoric perspective, a viewpoint that exists outside the dramatic arc of history and will remain when history has finished its drama. He said Bombadil represents the spirit that desires knowledge of other things, their history and nature, because they are other and wholly independent of the inquiring mind. Not the spirit that wants to shape things, the spirit that wants to know them. The difference between Bombadil and every other being of power in Middle-earth is not a difference of strength, it is a difference of orientation. He relates to the world contemplatively, not instrumentally. He knows the forest because the forest interests him. He does not seek to command it, preserve it, save it, or improve it. Now set that against Sauron. Sauron's every action is instrumental. Every alliance he forms is in service of his project. Every craft he undertakes is in service of his will. When he persuaded the elves of Eregion to forge the rings of power, he was teaching them craft while learning it himself, all in service of the plan that would eventually produce the One Ring. He experiences nothing for its own sake. Everything is used. Everything is material for his purpose. And this is where the ring's mechanism comes from. The ring works by turning the bearer's desires into instruments, by reaching into what someone most wants and offering to make it real, in exchange for the bearer becoming an instrument of Sauron's will in turn. It is a transaction, a leverage point. The ring finds the thing you most want, the thing you would do almost anything for, and it makes itself indispensable to the getting of that thing. Tom Bombadil has no desire of that kind. In letter 153, Tolkien is explicit. Bombadil's orientation toward the world is one of attention and presence, not of wanting. He does not desire to preserve Middle-earth as Galadriel does. He does not desire to guide it wisely as Gandalf does. He does not desire to see evil destroyed as Aragorn does. He simply is, in his valley, with his songs, beside his river, attending to the world around him, because the world interests him, not because he needs anything from it. And the ring, which was built to offer people what they need, finds in Tom Bombadil a being who needs nothing at all. Now here is what nobody thinks about when they consider Bombadil's relationship to power. The Old Forest encounter with Old Man Willow is a clearer demonstration of his actual authority than the ring scene. Old Man Willow is not just a threatening tree, he is one of the oldest living things in the narrative, a spirit that predates the War of the Ring by an age, malevolent in a way that has nothing to do with Sauron or Morgoth or any of the Third Age's specific corruption. He represents the old dark of the forests, the hostility of ancient nature toward the walking things of the world, something that has been hostile since before there was a name for hostility. He swallows Merry and Pippin. He tries to drown Frodo. He is doing what he has always done. And Tom Bombadil arrives and sings, and Old Man Willow releases them. Not reluctantly, not after a struggle that nearly equals Old Man Willow's power. The moment Bombadil speaks, the tree obeys. Because within the domain that Bombadil inhabits, every old thing recognizes an authority older than its own existence. Old Man Willow has memory. He knows things. And what he knows, on whatever level ancient trees know things, is that Tom Bombadil's claim to this forest is prior to his. In The Fellowship of the Ring, Tolkien describes Bombadil's song as having no particular form, as seeming to be something the forest itself was singing, as though the forest's nature and Bombadil's voice are continuous. Not that he mimics the forest or speaks for it, that he and the forest are, in some sense, the same expression of the same deep thing. He is not commanding the old forest. He is the old forest, or something so close to it that the distinction barely matters. That authority does not extend outward beyond his domain. He makes this clear himself. He can call the hobbits back to him if they get into trouble within his land. He gives them a way to summon him, but he is explicit. This works within his domain. Beyond it, he cannot help them. Not because he lacks power in some absolute sense, because his power is rooted in his presence, his continuity with the place he inhabits, his being there that predates every other being there in that specific stretch of land. Picture this: dawn over the Withywindle Valley. Not the dawn of kingdoms and great battles, the wide dawn that breaks over the plains of Rohan when Theoden rides out, the kind of dawn that feels like history watching itself. A smaller dawn, mist low over the river, catching in the hollows of the bank. The trees standing still but not dormant, not sleeping, the way trees always know when it is almost light, even in the dead of winter. And moving through the mist, unhurried, not looking for anything in particular, Tom Bombadil walks the bounds of his world. The trees do not shift to block him. The roots do not reach for him. The river does not run contrary to his passing. He does not walk through the old forest. He walks with it. He is part of its grammar. This is what it looks like when a being's authority over a place is not imposed but original. Not won, not maintained through vigilance and effort, just there, the way a river is there, the way the light is there in the morning, the way the ground is there beneath your feet, whether you notice it or not. Now we need to compare him to Ungoliant, because Ungoliant is the only other being in the legendarium who operates by a similar logic, and the contrast between them reveals something essential about what Bombadil actually is. In the Silmarillion, in the chapter of the Darkening of Valinor, Ungoliant appears as a being whose origin is unknown. She is described as a spirit, shaped like a spider, who lurks in a dark valley, and weaves shadows so thick they cannot be penetrated. Morgoth finds her there and enlists her. Her origin is not given. She was not numbered among the Ainur who descended into Arda at its making. She simply is, as Bombadil simply is, a being whose existence the Ainulindal cannot fully account for. Together she and Morgoth destroy the two trees of Valinor, the source of light for the Blessed Realm, the light that would later be preserved in the Silmarils. Ungoliant drinks the light from the trees and grows so enormous and so powerful that even Morgoth cannot control her. She turns on him and nearly kills him. It takes the combined force of every Balrog in his service to drive her away. She flees south and grows so vast that the Silmarillion simply loses track of her, and Tolkien's note on her ultimate fate is one of the darkest lines he ever wrote. She devoured herself at last in her own emptiness. What is Ungoliant? Tolkien never tells us precisely, but he gives us enough. She is primordial. She predates the cosmological order. She is outside the framework of the Ainur, and when she operates within the world, she is more powerful than anything within that framework can easily resist. So is Tom Bombadil. But here is the difference. Ungoliant is a consumer. She drinks light. She grows vast by emptying everything around her. Her nature is to reduce, to void, to hollow out. And ultimately she has nothing left but herself to consume. So she does. Her primordiality is in service of appetite, which means it is in service of nothing, which means it ends in self-destruction. Bombadil is generative. He sings, and things respond. His presence in the forest is not draining but enlivening. When the hobbits arrive at his house, Tolkien describes the feeling they get from Goldberry and from the house itself as like stepping out of doors on a bright morning, something that opens rather than closes. He does not consume his domain. He is continuous with it. He does not empty the world around him to fill himself. He is already full. He is already, entirely, himself. The ring, which works by offering to fill a void, by promising that the thing you most want can be yours, finds in Bombadil someone who has no void. He does not want to be bigger or stronger, or more powerful, or more enduring, or more beloved, or more remembered. He wants nothing beyond what he is. And so the ring's promise is meaningless to him. It is not that he refuses the offer. It is that he cannot hear it. The frequency on which the ring broadcasts does not exist in his experience of the world. That is the deepest meaning of his immunity. Not that he is stronger than the ring's power, that the ring's power is built for a certain kind of creature, and he is a different kind entirely. And now here is the question that has been building since the cold open. If all of this is true, if Bombadil is what the lore suggests, why did he not walk to Mordor? This is the question that bothers people, and it should bother people. If the one being immune to the ring had simply walked south, if he had shown up at the Samath Naur with his songs and his cheerfulness and his total indifference to Sauron's power, if the ring could no more function on him than a lock can trap smoke, what would have happened? Here is what Gandalf says. He says Bombadil would not hold the ring safely, not because the ring would corrupt him, because he would throw it away or forget he had it. That is not Gandalf dismissing Bombadil as careless. That is Gandalf describing a being for whom the ring is genuinely, literally, not an object of attention. The ring is Sauron's greatest instrument of power. Bombadil is a being who has no instruments, and no power in the sense Sauron means it. The ring in his hands is like handing a fishing lure to someone who has never wanted a fish and cannot conceive of wanting one. He looks at it, finds it uninteresting, and sets it down somewhere. But here is the deeper answer, and it is in letter 153. Tolkien writes that Bombadil represents no desire for power, and then he says something crucial. This is not a learned discipline. It is not resistance. It is a nature. Bombadil does not reach for power the way Galadriel does not reach for the ring through sustained and painful self-denial. Bombadil simply does not have the orientation toward the world that would make power desirable. And here is what that means for the question of whether he could have marched to Mordor. If Bombadil marched to Mordor with the purpose of defeating Sauron, he would, for the first time, be reaching for something outside his essential nature. He would be extending himself outward toward a goal, toward a future outcome he wants to produce, toward a world reshaped according to his intention. He would be, in the most precise Tolkien-specific sense, becoming an instrument of his own will instead of an expression of his own being. And, perhaps in that moment, the ring would have something to grip. Perhaps his immunity to the ring depends on his having no project, no ambition, no desire that the ring can amplify. The moment he wanted to defeat Sauron, the moment he reached for victory, the ring's mechanism might find its way in through the door of that wanting, however pure the wanting was. This is speculation. Tolkien never tested it. But it follows from the logic he established, from the rules he set down about how power corrupts in proportion to the greatness of the one who reaches for it. Galadriel's temptation is so terrifying precisely because her desire to do good is so vast. Gandalf refuses the ring because his desire to use it well would be irresistible to it. The greatest beings are the most vulnerable, not because they are weakest, but because they want the most. Bombadil's invulnerability may be inseparable from his smallness of ambition. His immunity and his uselessness to the War of the Ring are the same quality, expressed from two directions. Picture this. The hobbits leave Bombadil's house on a grey morning and head south toward Bree, toward the beginning of the long road that will take them through Rivendell, across the misty mountains, into Moria, through Lothlorien, down the Anduin, across Rohan, to the very edge of Mordor. Every step of that road will cost something. Gandalf will fall in Moria and be remade. Boromir will fall to the ring's corruption and then to orc arrows. The Fellowship will be broken. Frodo will be stung half to death by a spider and carried into Mordor as a prisoner. Sam will carry the ring up the mountain alone. Frodo will fail at the last moment, and the world will be saved not by his heroism, but by his weakness, and Gollum's obsession, and something the text calls, by no name except, quietly, Providence. And as they walk away, Tom Bombadil is already back in his valley. He has given them what he could, which is a night of safety in a world without enough of it, and he has returned to what he is, which is the oldest thing in that part of the world, belonging entirely to itself, entirely present, entirely beyond the reach of the ring or the war it has made necessary. He does not follow them with his eyes. The forest does not watch them go. He has already moved on, attending to the morning, to the river, to whatever small and ancient thing is happening in the world he inhabits. He is not cruel in this. He is not indifferent in a moral sense. He simply cannot follow them into a story that is not his story. The Barrow-wights show us one more dimension of what Bombadil can actually do, because the Barrow-wights are not simply dangerous. They are spiritually dangerous, in a specific way. They are the servants of the Witch King of Angmar, the Lord of the Nazgul, dispatched to haunt the ancient burial mounds of the Men of the North. The Witch King, the greatest of the 9 ring-wraiths, the servant of Sauron who cannot be killed by any man living. His shadow servants, haunting the Barrow Downs, capture Frodo, Sam, Merry and Pippin in the night, dress them in burial gold, lay them out for a dark purpose in a dark barrow. Tom Bombadil walks in, and the Barrow-wight is simply gone. Not driven out, not defeated in any dramatic sense. The text gives it barely a paragraph. Bombadil sings, "The light comes, and the white dissolves." These are spiritual servants of the Witch King, one of the 9 most terrible entities in Third Age Middle-earth, and they cannot maintain their existence in the same space Bombadil occupies. The pattern completes itself. Old Man Willow, a primordial forest spirit with malice so old it predates the current age's specific evil, obeys him. The Barrow-wights, servants of Sauron's greatest lieutenant, vanish in his presence. The One Ring, the masterwork of the Dark Lord himself, is meaningless in his hands. The hierarchy of dark power in the Third Age, Sauron at the apex, the Nazgul beneath him, the lesser corruptions beneath them, does not function around Tom Bombadil. Not because he is stronger than each of these things in a combat sense, because the framework from which all of their power derives cannot engage with what he is. And yet, after the Barrow-wight dissolves, Bombadil does not cleanse the Barrow Downs. He does not pursue the evil remaining there. He gives the hobbits swords from the Barrow, ancient blades from the kingdom of Arnor, gives them a way to call him if they need him within his domain, and then goes home. His domain, his valley, his river, his songs. Everything outside that domain is not his story to write. Now let's talk about what Bombadil's existence actually means. Because Tolkien was not doing something merely decorative by including him. He was working through something philosophically serious, and understanding what it is changes the whole architecture of the book. The Lord of the Rings is, at its core, about the dangers of power. Not corrupt power specifically, power as a category. The rings of power are dangerous, not only because they were made by Sauron. They are dangerous because they represent the idea that one being's will can be extended outward to dominate the world around it. The 3, which Sauron never touched, were still made to preserve, to protect, to impose a being's vision of the good onto the world. Even that, even the most generous version of power, has a cost in Tolkien's moral universe. Galadriel's temptation makes this vivid. She has loved Middle-earth for thousands of years. Her vision of what it should be is beautiful, generous, just. She has thought about the ring more carefully and for longer than almost anyone alive. And when she imagines taking it and using it, the text describes her shifting, darkening, becoming dark and terrible as the dawn, something terrible emerging from what was lovely. Not because her desire is evil, because the act of reaching, of extending your will outward to dominate, even in service of beauty, is its own kind of transformation. Tolkien wrote in his letters that power of that kind is corrupting, not because of what it does to evil people, but because of what it does to good ones. It takes the best desire, the truest love of the good, and turns it outward until the person doing it has become what they sought to prevent. And against all of this stands Tom Bombadil, who reaches for nothing, who extends no dominion, who has, over his long existence prior to the beginning of the age, accumulated no ring power, no political influence, no legacy of careful control. His domain is his valley and the natural world immediately around it, and his authority there is absolute precisely because it was never acquired. It was never imposed. It is what he is. He is the answer to the question that Tolkien's moral world keeps asking, which is, what does power look like when it is rooted in being rather than having? What does authority look like when it emerges from presence rather than acquisition? It looks like Tom Bombadil, laughing, singing, handing the One Ring back with a smile. But there is a tragedy here, quiet and specific, that Tolkien embeds in the very qualities that make Bombadil wonderful. The answer Bombadil embodies cannot be deployed. It cannot march. It cannot make the terrible necessary choices that the War of the Ring required. Bombadil cannot sacrifice himself for the cause, because there is no cause in his world to sacrifice for. He cannot form the Fellowship, because the Fellowship requires beings who are subject to the same drama, who are part of the same story, who can suffer together and hold each other up. He cannot be the hero because heroism requires a relationship to stakes that he simply does not have, and there is a more specific version of this tragedy. His immunity to the ring comes from having no desire that the ring could amplify. His authority over the natural world comes from his total absence of will to dominate it. These qualities are one thing, they cannot be separated. The thing that makes him immune is the same thing that makes him unable to save the world by using the ring's power against its maker. He cannot carry the ring to Mount Doom because caring about the ring's destruction would require wanting something, and wanting something would give the ring its lever. Frodo, the ring-bearer, is the opposite, entirely susceptible to the ring, susceptible in proportion to how deeply he desires the good, the Shire, his friends, the end of darkness. He nearly fails. He does fail, at the moment of the final test, and the world is saved not by his strength but by his compassion, a mercy shown to Gollum months before at Sam's objection, a mercy that comes back to save everything at the moment when Frodo himself could not. Bombadil is unbreakable. Frodo is breakable. The world needed the one who could break. This is Tolkien's deepest structural insight in the book, and it is embedded in the presence of Tom Bombadil. The unbreakable being cannot save the world. The world can only be saved by beings who are breakable enough to be part of it, embedded in its stakes, subject to its losses, capable of the kind of suffering that makes a choice meaningful. The margin is where Tom Bombadil lives. His valley is not on the road to anywhere. His songs are not in any lore book Sauron consults. His name does not appear in the intelligence reports of Mordor. He is, from the perspective of any calculating intelligence looking for threats and powers, exactly what he appears to be. A cheerful old man by a river, probably harmless, certainly not worth the attention. And that invisibility to power-seeking logic is itself a form of protection. Sauron looks for things that mirror his own kind of power. He can only recognize threats that operate within the same framework he operates in, that want what he wants and compete for what he competes for. Tom Bombadil does not want anything Sauron wants. He does not participate in the game of dominion and submission that the ring was made to play. The Eye of Sauron, which sweeps across Middle-earth looking for the ring, looking for threats, looking for anyone who might challenge or undermine his dominion, passes over a valley by a river without pausing. Because there is nothing there that looks like power to the Eye's understanding of power. He is the most powerful being in Third Age Middle-earth, in the most significant single test, which is immunity to the ring. And he is invisible to power because he does not look like power to anything that only knows how to see power. In this he has something in common with the hobbits. They are also not on Sauron's radar, not because they are insignificant in any absolute sense, but because they are not in the game of power that Sauron understands. The ring ends up saved and destroyed by a halfling, the least of the free peoples, the most overlooked, the most dismissible, the one Sauron never thought to watch, and the most powerful being in Middle-earth, the one the ring cannot touch, is in a valley that power forgets to look for. This is what Tolkien was building, across the pages that introduced Tom Bombadil, not a comic interlude before the real story, a proof of concept for the argument the whole book makes, that the things which endure are not the things that grab and hoard and dominate, that the world's deepest nature, the thing beneath the ring's corruption, beneath Sauron's architecture of power, beneath even Morgoth's original deformation of Arda, is something that could not be touched by any of it, something that was there before it started. And here we arrive at the question again, in its full weight. The ring was unmade. Mount Doom erupted. Sauron's spirit was scattered across the air of the world, diminished so completely that the Silmarillion author of the Fourth Age would write that he had become less than a shadow and could never again take form or gather strength. The Third Age ended. The elves sailed into the west and the Age of Men began, and Middle-earth slowly forgot what it had been. Tom Bombadil remained, not because Tolkien tells us he survived, precisely, but because he is the kind of thing that does not end with an age. Ages are historical events. He is not historical. He is the valley and the river and the song that the valley and the river were singing before there were ages to count. If Tom Bombadil had the power to make Sauron's greatest weapon irrelevant, was his refusal to intervene in the War of the Ring a choice of wisdom? Or was it something far older and stranger than wisdom, a will so rooted in its own nature that the fate of kingdoms simply did not reach him? We have more now to think with when we ask this question. We know that wisdom, in Tolkien's sense, is always earned through suffering and engagement with the world's drama. Elrond's wisdom was bought by watching Isildur refuse to destroy the ring at the very moment when the war was won. Galadriel's wisdom was bought by millennia of temptation resisted. Gandalf's wisdom was bought by his deliberate limitation, the deliberate constraint of his power, the choice to guide and persuade rather than dominate. Every wise being in Middle-earth paid for their wisdom with loss. Tom Bombadil has no such wisdom. He has something prior to it. He has what Tolkien called the natural and unhistoric perspective, the viewpoint of something that exists before the story's drama and will exist after it. He did not earn his immunity to the ring. He did not earn his authority over the old forest. These are what he is, not what he achieved. So we cannot say he was wise to refuse intervention. Wisdom implies a choice made with full understanding of what is being refused. Bombadil did not refuse. The question of intervention did not reach him. The stakes of the War of the Ring are not stakes that a being without historical embeddedness can access. He cannot lose the Shire because the Shire is not his home. He cannot lose the Fellowship because the Fellowship is not his people. He cannot lose Middle-earth as a political entity because Middle-earth as a political entity is a concept that belongs to the Third Age, and he belongs to something older and more fundamental than an age. He is not wise. He is prior to wisdom. He is the kind of being that wisdom, with its long view and its earned understanding, can only gesture toward and say, "There is something here that I cannot fully account for." And maybe that is the truest thing Tolkien hid inside Tom Bombadil. Not a mystery to be solved. A reminder that beneath every story about power and corruption and the long defeat and the choices that shape the world, there is something that was never the story's subject, something that exists in its own domain, with its own songs, by its own river, something that the ring cannot touch because the ring was made for a world that came after it, and it will still be here when the story that made the ring possible is long finished. Some things endure not because they fought, but because they were never the kind of thing that could be taken. If this changed how you think about Bombadil, or if you have your own read on what his immunity actually means, what it says about the nature of power in Tolkien's world, drop it in the comments. The debate about what Bombadil actually is has been running since 1954, and it shows no sign of being settled, which is, I think, exactly what Tolkien intended. If you want more of this kind of deep excavation of the parts of the legendarium that the films left behind, subscribe and stay close. There is more of Middle-earth in the books than 3 films could ever hold, and we have barely started going through it.